The air in the boardroom was thick enough to choke on, a stale perfume of old money, expensive cologne, and unspoken threats. At the head of the impossibly long mahogany table, Kwon Jin-woo sat like a king on a throne of black leather, his stillness a source of immense power. His eyes, cold chips of obsidian, were fixed on the man opposite him, Mr. Tanaka, whose smile was a thin, predatory slash in his weathered face. Between them lay a single document, a contract that would merge shadows, a pact written in ink that might as well have been blood. Beside Jin-woo, slightly behind his right shoulder, a young woman stood with a stillness that mirrored his own, though hers was born of terror, not command. Seo Hana. Her job tonight was simple: to be invisible, to translate if necessary, and to verify the authenticity of the final signatures. It was a task that utilized her unique, obscure skill set, a talent Jin-woo had discovered and cultivated like a rare, precious orchid. Jin-woo's second-in-command, Park Min-jun, slid the document in front of Tanaka's man, who signed with a flourish. Then it was passed back to Tanaka himself. The old man picked up a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen, his movements deliberate, theatrical. He scrawled his name, the scratch of the nib the only sound in the cavernous room. The document made its final journey across the polished wood to Jin-woo. He did not look at it. His gaze remained locked on Tanaka. It was a test, a display of dominance. He trusted the people he put in place. He trusted Min-jun. He trusted her. Hana stepped forward silently, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was the part of his world that still made her skin crawl, the silent, violent pressure that preceded every major move. She leaned over the document, her long hair curtaining her face. Her expertise was in the subtle tells of penmanship, the pressure, the angle, the almost imperceptible hesitation in a curve that betrayed a forgery. She had studied Tanaka's signature for weeks, poring over dozens of authenticated examples. Her breath hitched. It was almost perfect. Almost. But the final stroke of the K in Tanaka was a fraction of a millimeter too high. The pressure on the downstroke was too light, the work of a hand that was copying, not creating. It was a masterful fake, but a fake nonetheless. She straightened up, her face pale. Jin-woo's eyes flickered to her for a single, questioning instant. In that moment, the entire room, the multi-billion-won deal, the fragile peace between two dynasties of darkness, all of it held its breath, waiting for her. She leaned closer to his ear, her lips almost brushing the shell of it. Her voice was a ghost, a sound meant only for him, lost to the oppressive silence. That's not his signature. The change in Kwon Jin-woo was instantaneous and terrifying. The cold calm shattered, replaced by an arctic frost that radiated from him in palpable waves. He did not raise his voice. He did not move a muscle, save for the slow, deliberate way he lifted his hand and placed it flat on the fraudulent contract. "The deal is off," he said. The words were quiet, but they detonated in the room like a bomb. Tanaka's smile vanished. "What is the meaning of this?" he snarled, his voice a gravelly affront. Jin-woo finally looked down at the document, then back at Tanaka. A slow, chilling smile touched his lips, a smile that held no warmth, only the promise of ruin. "It means," he said, his voice dropping to a silken threat, "that you will leave this building now, and you will pray that I forget your face by morning, because if I do not, my people will make you forget your own name." He stood, the deal dead, the treaty broken, all because of a whisper, all because he trusted the woman from the coffee shop more than he trusted the empires of men. 6 months earlier, the world had been a different kind of gray for Seo Hana. It was the gray of a pre-dawn Seoul sky, the gray of weak, watery coffee, the gray of a life lived on the knife's edge of exhaustion. She worked 2 jobs, barista from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and a freelance document authentication service from her cramped apartment at night. The first paid her rent. The second fed her soul, a strange and lonely passion for the art of the written word, for the truth or lies hidden in the loops and lines of a person's hand. Her cafe, a small independent place tucked into a bustling Gangnam side street, was a river of transient faces. Students cramming for exams, office workers grabbing a jolt of caffeine, gossiping friends. They were a blur, a series of orders and polite, meaningless smiles. She was good at her job. She was efficient, she remembered the regulars' orders, and she had perfected the art of looking pleasant while her mind was 1,000 miles away, worrying about an overdue utility bill. Then he walked in. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, incongruous sound. The man who entered seemed to suck all the light and noise out of the room. He was tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin, a dark charcoal gray that made him seem carved from stone. He moved with a predatory grace that was utterly out of place amongst the slouching students and harried salarymen. But it was his face that stopped her. It was a masterpiece of harsh, beautiful lines, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were deep, dark, and utterly empty. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a flaw that only made the severe perfection of his features more arresting. He looked, she thought with a sudden, unwelcome jolt, like a fallen prince from a historical drama, one who had seen too much war. He didn't approach the counter. He took a small table in the far corner, a place that gave him a clear view of the entire shop, and sat. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't open a laptop. He just sat, his hands resting on the table, and watched. His stillness was unnerving. Hannah found her eyes drifting towards him as she frothed milk and ground beans. His gaze wasn't leering or aggressive. It was something else. It was intense, analytical, as if he were committing every detail of the room to memory, or perhaps just every detail of her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts fear and something else, something she refused to name. He stayed for an hour and then left as silently as he had arrived, leaving an untouched glass of water on the table. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Same time, same table, same unnerving stillness. He never ordered, he just watched. Okay, that's officially creepy. Her friend and co-worker, Sora, whispered to her on the 4th day. Level 10 creepy. He looks like he's either going to propose to you or murder you. Maybe both. Hannah forced a laugh, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. Don't be ridiculous. He's probably just some corporate drone waiting for a meeting. A corporate drone in a suit that costs more than our combined yearly rent? Sora snorted. No, that man owns things. Maybe people. Hannah didn't want to admit that Sora was voicing her own deepest anxieties. The man radiated a kind of power that was foreign and frightening. It was the power of old money, the kind that didn't need to be loud because it was woven into the fabric of the city. Her world was about survival, about scraping by. His was about dominion. The two were never meant to intersect. And yet his eyes kept finding hers. Across the noisy cafe, through the steam of the espresso machine, their gazes would lock for a fleeting second. In those moments, she felt a strange sense of recognition. The profound loneliness she saw in his eyes was a mirror of the ache in her own chest. It was a dangerous thought, a foolishly romantic notion, but it took root in her mind and refused to be dislodged. Kwon Jin-woo did not know why he kept coming back to this small, unremarkable cafe. His life was a meticulously scheduled regimen of meetings, strategic planning, and the quiet, brutal enforcement of his family's will. There was no room for deviation, no time for whims. But the first time he saw her, time had stopped. He had been walking to a meeting, his mind a cold calculus of risk and reward, when a scent had caught his attention. Not the cloying sweetness of a high-end bakery, but the rich, earthy smell of real coffee. On impulse, he had pushed open the door, and he saw her. She was standing behind the counter, her brow furrowed in concentration as she created a delicate foam leaf on the surface of a latte. There was a smudge of chocolate on her cheek, and her apron was dusted with flour. She was not beautiful in the way the women in his world were beautiful, polished, perfect, and interchangeable. Her beauty was in her reality. It was in the tired lines around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the graceful efficiency of her movements. She looked up and her eyes met his. For a heartbeat, the world fell away. He saw a strength in her, a resilience that called to the weary soldier in his own soul. He felt an immediate, inexplicable need to know her, to possess her, to protect her from the hardships that had etched those tired lines onto her face. It was an insane, illogical impulse. It was a weakness. He, Kwon Jin-woo, leader of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, did not have weaknesses. His father had beaten that lesson into him from the time he was a boy. Emotions were liabilities. Attachments were weapons that could be used against you. So he sat in the corner and watched, telling himself it was a strategic observation. He was assessing a new element in his environment. But it was a lie. He was simply memorizing the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the small, genuine smile she gave an elderly customer, the weary slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. He was learning her. Min Jun, his ever-loyal second, thought he was losing his mind. "Another trip to the cafe, sir?" Min Jun had asked that morning, his tone carefully neutral as he held open the door of the black sedan. "There's a security concern in the area I'm monitoring," Jin-woo had replied, his voice flat. Min-jun didn't challenge the lie. He just nodded. "Of course, sir, the barista security concern." Jin-woo had ignored the dry remark. He knew it was irrational. He knew it was dangerous. But he couldn't stop. Seeing her for that 1 hour each day had become the only real part of his life. The rest was just a performance, the grim role he had inherited. That cafe, her presence, had become his sanctuary, a sanctuary he was about to violate. On the 7th day, he decided watching was no longer enough. Hana was wiping down tables after the lunch rush, her muscles aching with a familiar bone-deep fatigue. The bell chimed. She looked up, her stomach tightening when she saw him. But this time, he didn't go to his corner table. This time, he walked directly to the counter. To her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He towered over her, and the sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. The faint scent of expensive cologne and something clean, like rain on pavement, clung to him. "Hello," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smoother and deeper than she had imagined. It sent a ridiculous shiver through her. "Hi," she managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Can I get you something?" "An Americano," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "And your name?" Hana blinked. The bluntness of it caught her off guard. "My name is on my name tag." His gaze dropped to the small plastic rectangle pinned to her apron. "Seo Hana," he read aloud, tasting the syllables. "It's a good name." He looked back up at her. "I am Kwon Jin-woo." He didn't offer a handshake. He just stated his name as if it were a fact of the universe, like gravity or the turning of the earth. She busied herself with making his coffee, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel his stare on her back, a physical weight. She was intensely aware of the smudge on her apron, the frizz in her ponytail. She felt exposed, dissected. She placed the cup on the counter, careful not to touch his hand as he reached for it. "That'll be 4,001. He produced a wallet made of impossibly soft black leather and laid a 50,001 note on the counter. "Keep the change." "We're not allowed to accept tips," she said, her ingrained honesty overriding her intimidation. "Then consider it a down payment," he said. "A down payment for what?" she asked, confused. "For your time," he said, his expression unreadable. "I'd like to take you to dinner tonight." Hana stared at him, speechless. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. A man like him didn't ask for things. He decided them. A part of her, the sensible, self-preservationist part, screamed at her to say no, to run. This man was dangerous. His world would swallow hers whole. But another part of her, the part that was so tired of being sensible, the part that felt the echo of his loneliness, was curious. "I have to work," she said, the excuse sounding flimsy even to her own ears. "Your second job," he stated, not asked. The calligraphy and authentication. "I know." A cold dread washed over her. He knew about her other job. How could he possibly know that? How? "I am a man who finds things out," he said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. "I have a business proposition for you that I would prefer to discuss over a meal. A legitimate one." She saw a flicker of something in his eyes then. Not quite vulnerability, but a sincere desire for her to believe him. It was the crack in the marble facade. Against all her better judgment, she heard herself say, "Fine, one dinner." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his severe face, making him look younger, almost human. "I'll have a car pick you up at your apartment at 7. He knew where she lived. Of course he knew where she lived. He turned and walked out, leaving her with a steaming coffee, a large bill, and a sense of impending doom that tasted terrifyingly like excitement. The car that arrived at 7 was not a car. It was a gleaming black vessel of silent, intimidating luxury. The driver, a man built like a refrigerator, opened the door for her without a word. Hannah, dressed in the one nice dress she owned, felt like an imposter stepping into another dimension. The restaurant was on the top floor of a skyscraper, a place of hushed tones, sparkling crystal, and panoramic views of Seoul's glittering skyline. Jin-woo was already there, waiting at a secluded table. He stood when she approached, and the simple gesture of respect was so at odds with his intimidating aura that it left her feeling off balance. "You look beautiful," he said, his gaze appreciative. "You look like you own the place," she retorted, the sarcasm a familiar shield. He inclined his head slightly. "My family does." Of course they did. Dinner was a surreal experience. The food was exquisite, tiny works of art on oversized plates. Jin-woo was a surprisingly easy conversationalist, asking her about her work, her passion for historical documents, her life. He listened with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He spoke little of himself, offering only vague references to a family business and global logistics. It was a carefully curated version of his life, and she knew it. "So this business proposition?" she finally asked, pushing a piece of perfectly seared tuna around her plate. "I have a collection," he began. "Ancient texts, historical letters. Some of them are of questionable origin. I need someone with a true expert's eye to verify their authenticity. Someone I can trust." "Why me?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. "There are academics, museum curators. Academics can be bought. Curators have allegiances. You," he said, leaning forward slightly, his eyes pinning her in place. "Have integrity. I saw it the moment I looked at you. You value the truth." It was the most profound compliment anyone had ever paid her. He wasn't praising her looks or her charm. He was praising her soul. It disarmed her completely. "The pay would be substantial," he continued, "enough that you could quit your job at the cafe." The offer hung in the air between them, shimmering with temptation. A way out, a path to financial security, to a life where she wasn't constantly exhausted. But it came with him. It meant stepping into his world. "I'll have to think about it," she said, her voice small. "Of course," he said, leaning back. But his eyes said, "You will say yes." The drive home was silent. When the car pulled up to her shabby apartment building, he got out with her. At her door, under the flickering fluorescent light of the hallway, the spell of the fancy restaurant was broken. This was her reality. "Thank you for dinner," she said, fumbling for her keys. "Hannah," he said, his voice soft. He reached out and gently brushed the back of his fingers against her cheek, where the smudge of chocolate had been that first day. His touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to her core. "I will not harm you. I swear it. She looked into his eyes and saw a desperate sincerity there. She saw the lonely man from the coffee shop, not the kingpin from the skyscraper. And in that moment, she believed him. It was the most reckless thing she had ever done. She took the job. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Jin-woo set her up in a small private office in one of his corporate towers, a quiet, sunlit room filled with state-of-the-art equipment for document analysis. The texts he brought her were fascinating, centuries-old scrolls and letters that made her heart sing. She lost herself in the work, in the thrill of uncovering history, of spotting the clever forgeries and verifying the priceless originals. Jin-woo was a constant, quiet presence. He would appear in her office in the late afternoons, bringing her coffee, made exactly the way she liked it, and simply sit, watching her work. They rarely spoke of business. Instead, he would ask about her day, about the intricacies of her analysis. He was genuinely interested. Slowly, cautiously, the walls around her heart began to crumble. She saw past the power and the wealth to the man beneath. She saw his loneliness, the immense weight of the responsibility he carried. She found herself looking forward to his visits, to the low timbre of his voice, to the way his severe expression would soften when he looked at her. One evening, she was working late, squinting at a particularly difficult piece of parchment under a magnifying lamp when he came in. "You should go home," he said gently. "You'll strain your eyes." "I'm almost done," she murmured, not looking up. "This forgery is incredible. The paper is period correct, the ink composition is nearly perfect. But the forger made one tiny mistake. He used a character that wasn't introduced into the written language until 50 years after this was supposedly written." She finally looked up at him, a triumphant smile on her face. "Got him." Jin-woo wasn't looking at the document. He was looking at her, his expression one of raw admiration. "You're brilliant," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. He stepped closer, standing behind her chair. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs gently kneading the tense muscles there. Her breath caught in her throat. His touch was firm, possessive, yet exquisitely tender. "You work too hard," he whispered, his voice close to her ear. "I have to," she whispered back, her eyes fluttering shut. "It's all I've ever known." "You don't have to anymore," he said. "Let me take care of you." The words were a balm and a terror. She wanted it. Gods, she wanted to let go, to let this powerful, intense man shield her from the world. But the fiercely independent part of her, the part that had fought for every scrap of her existence, reared up in protest. She stood abruptly, moving away from his touch. "I can take care of myself." The hurt in his eyes was a physical blow. He masked it quickly, his cool composure snapping back into place, but she had seen it. "I know," he said quietly. "That is one of the things I admire most about you." The tension between them was a living thing, a humming wire of unspoken feelings. He wanted more than an employee. She wanted more than a benefactor. But the chasm between their worlds seemed impossibly wide. The first crack in their carefully constructed world appeared a week later. Hana was leaving the office building when she saw Jin-woo in the underground garage, deep in a heated conversation with Min-jun and two other men whose faces were hard and unforgiving. Jin-woo's demeanor was different from any way she had ever seen him. The gentleness was gone, replaced by a chilling authority. His voice was sharp, his gestures clipped and decisive. He was giving orders, and the other men were listening with a deference that bordered on fear. As she watched from the shadows of a concrete pillar, one of the men handed Jin-woo a long, slender case. He opened it. Even from a distance, she could see the dull, metallic gleam of a firearm. Her blood ran cold. Jin-woo snapped the case shut and saw her. His body went rigid. The mask of the ruthless leader fell away, and for a second, she saw panic in his eyes. He said something sharp to the other men, who dispersed immediately, melting back into the shadows. He started walking towards her, his expression a mixture of regret and resolve. "Hana," he said, his voice low. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. What's going on? He stopped in front of her, his tall frame blocking out the harsh garage lighting. It's complicated? Global logistics doesn't usually involve guns, she said, her voice laced with a bitterness born of fear. He let out a long, weary sigh. No, it doesn't. He looked at her then, and she saw the internal battle raging on his face. He was deciding whether to lie to her or to risk telling her the truth. Come with me, he said finally. There's something I need to show you, something I need to tell you. He led her not to his car, but to a private elevator she had never seen before. It descended deep into the earth, far below the parking garage. The doors opened into a space that was part high-tech command center, part armory. Maps of the city covered one wall, dotted with blinking lights. Men and women with headsets sat at computer terminals, their faces grim, and on the far wall, behind reinforced glass, was a collection of weapons that would rival a small army's. Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. This was not a corporation. This was something else entirely. My grandfather started this organization, Jinwoo said, his voice echoing in the sterile, quiet room. He didn't look at her, but at the maps on the wall. He came from nothing after the war. He built an empire from the dirt and the shadows. He did what was necessary to survive, to protect his own. He turned to face her, his eyes dark with the weight of generations. My father expanded it. He made it more powerful, more ruthless. And then he passed it to me. This is the Kwan family business, Hannah. We control the ports. We manage the city's nightlife. We finance ventures that the banks won't touch. We are a necessary shadow in a city that pretends to be all light. You're a gangster, she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Some would use that word, he admitted, his face impassive. I see myself as a king. I protect my territory. I provide for my people. I maintain a certain order. But yes, he conceded, a flicker of self-loathing in his eyes. It is a world built on violence and fear. The confession settled over her, heavy and suffocating. Everything made sense now. The money, the power, the car, the fear in other men's eyes, the scar on his eyebrow. Why are you telling me this? She asked, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off a chill. Because I am tired of lying to you, he said, taking a step closer. And because I cannot have you in my life if you do not know what my life is. I will not build a relationship on a foundation of deceit. He reached for her, but she flinched back. The movement, small as it was, struck him like a physical blow. He let his hand drop. I love you, Hannah, he said, the words raw, torn from the deepest part of him. It was a confession more shocking than the one about his criminal empire. I think I have from the moment I saw you. You are the only real thing in my life. The only good thing. Tears pricked her eyes. She loved him too. She had been denying it, fighting it, but it was the truth. She loved the lonely man who watched her from the corner of the cafe. She loved the gentle employer who brought her coffee. She loved the brilliant, burdened man who saw the truth in her soul. But could she love this man, the king of a shadow empire? The man with a gun in his car? My whole life, she said, her voice breaking, I've tried to be a good person, to live an honest life, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. It's all I have. My principles. I would never ask you to compromise them, he said desperately. I will keep you separate. I will build a wall between you and this part of my life. No one will ever touch you. I will burn the world to the ground before I let anyone harm you. But it will always be there, she cried, the tears finally falling. The violence, the fear, the money that comes from other people's pain, it will be on your hands. And if I'm with you, it will be on mine, too. The choice was tearing her apart. A life with him, a life of love, of security, of passion, or a life without him, a life that was safe and principled and utterly, devastatingly empty. She looked at the weapons behind the glass, then at the man she loved. I can't, she whispered, the words a death sentence for them both. I can't do this. She turned and fled, running from the elevator, from the command center, from the truth of who he was. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her and the agony of his stillness as he let her go. Leaving him was the hardest thing Seohana had ever done. It felt like tearing off a limb. The first few days were a blur of numb disbelief. She quit her job at his company, sending a formal, sterile email that felt like a betrayal. She went back to the cafe, the familiar routine a hollow comfort. She worked double shifts, trying to exhaust herself into a state where she was too tired to think, too tired to feel. But at night, in her small, lonely apartment, the grief would crash over her. She would lie awake, tracing the memory of his fingers on her cheek, hearing the raw confession of his love. Sora tried to help, bringing her takeout and bad movies, but she could not reach the core of Hana's misery. You did the right thing, Sora said one night, her voice gentle. He's from a different world, a dangerous world. I know, Hana whispered, staring at the ceiling. I know. But knowing didn't make the ache in her chest any less real. Her principles were intact, but her heart was shattered. Her life was safe again, and it was utterly devoid of color. The gray had returned, deeper and more oppressive than ever before. For Kwon Jin-woo, her absence was a void. The light she had brought into his world was extinguished, plunging him back into a darkness more profound than any he had known before. His sanctuary, the cafe, was now a place of torment. He drove past it once, and the sight of her through the window, moving with a lifeless, robotic efficiency, was a knife to his gut. He never went back. He threw himself into his work with a renewed ferocity. The gentleness she had coaxed out of him vanished, replaced by a cold, brutal pragmatism. He became the ruthless king his father had always wanted him to be. He crushed a rival organization that had been encroaching on his territory, his methods so swift and merciless that they sent a shockwave through the entire underworld. He consolidated power, made deals, and expanded his empire. He was more successful than ever, and he was utterly miserable. You should find her, Min Jun said one evening, finding Jin Woo standing alone in the dark, staring out the panoramic window of his penthouse office. This is killing you. She made her choice, Jin Woo said, his voice flat. She chose a life without me. She chose her principles, Min Jun corrected softly. Can you blame her? You showed her the monster. Of course she ran. Jin Woo turned from the window, his face a mask of anguish. Then what was I supposed to do? Lie to her forever? No, Min Jun said. You were supposed to change. The words hung in the air, a shocking, impossible proposition. Change? The Golden Dragon Syndicate was a legacy. It was his blood, his birthright, his curse. It was not something one simply changed. It would mean war. It would mean betraying his father's memory, his grandfather's struggle. It would mean dismantling an empire piece by piece, inviting chaos and retribution. It was impossible. But then he remembered the look on Hana's face in that command center. The terror, the disillusionment, the heartbreak. He remembered her whisper, I can't. A life of power without her was a life in a gilded cage, a hell of his own making. Min Jun's words had planted a seed, a radical, terrifying seed of an idea. What if he could change? What if he could become a man she didn't have to run from? A man whose hands were clean? The decision settled in him, not like a storm, but like a quiet, cold dawn. He would not change for her. He would change because she had shown him that a different way was possible. She had shown him what a soul was worth. He would make himself worthy of her memory, even if he never saw her again. The process was long and bloody. It began with a war within his own organization. He called a meeting of his top lieutenants, the old guard who had served his father. He laid out his plan to legitimize, to sell off the nightclubs, the gambling dens, the loan sharking operations, to sever ties with the cartels and the triads, to pivot entirely into the businesses that were already clean: shipping, construction, private equity. They thought he was insane. They called him weak, a traitor to his bloodline. His father's oldest friend, a man he had called uncle his whole life, spat on the floor at his feet. "Your father would be ashamed," the old man rasped. "My father is dead," Jin Woo replied, his voice like ice. "His ways die with him. This is the new way. You are either with me or you are my enemy. Choose." Many chose to be his enemy. The weeks that followed were a quiet, brutal war fought in the back alleys and boardrooms of Seoul. There were betrayals, ambushes, and attempts on his life. Jin Woo moved with the cold precision of a surgeon, cutting the rot from his own organization. He was wounded, he was exhausted, but he was relentless. Min Jun stayed by his side, his loyalty absolute, his belief in Jin Woo's new path unwavering. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to win. He dismantled the darkest parts of his empire, absorbing the financial losses, weathering the attacks. He poured money into his legitimate businesses, hiring top executives, rebranding and building a new reputation brick by painful brick. He was trading a kingdom of shadows for a smaller, cleaner republic of light. It was during the final, most delicate stage of this transformation that the deal with Tanaka was set. Tanaka's organization was one of the last major holdovers from his father's era, a powerful Yakuza clan from Japan. The deal was a parting of the ways, a complex contract that would formally sever their ties and divide their shared illicit assets. It was dangerous, and it required absolute trust. Jin Woo knew there was only one person in the world he trusted to verify the truth of the final document. Finding her was easy. He had never stopped having her watched, a silent, invisible guardian angel ensuring her safety. He sent Min Jun to her, not himself. He knew she would refuse if he asked. Min Jun found her at the cafe. He laid out the proposition carefully. A one-time job, a final consultation. The pay was astronomical, enough for her to buy her own apartment, to start her own business, to be free forever. He didn't mention Jin Woo's name, referring to him only as his employer. Hana hesitated. The money was life-changing, but she knew. She knew who the employer was. A part of her wanted to refuse, to keep the door to that world firmly shut. But another part, the part that still ached for him, was curious. What had he been doing these past 6 months? And she couldn't deny the professional pride, the challenge of such a high-stakes authentication. She agreed, which led her to that boardroom standing behind his shoulder, the fate of an empire resting on her expertise. When she whispered, "That's not his signature," it was more than just a professional opinion. It was an act of loyalty, an act of faith. When Jin Woo killed the deal, he wasn't just averting a financial disaster or a betrayal. He was making a statement. He was telling her and the entire world that her truth was now his law. His integrity was now measured by hers. After Tanaka and his men had been escorted from the building, the room was silent save for the quiet breathing of Jin Woo, Min Jun, and Hana. Jin Woo turned to her. The last 6 months had changed him. There were new lines of exhaustion around his eyes, and a fresh scar, a thin white line high on his cheekbone. But the emptiness in his eyes was gone. In its place was a fierce, determined light. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet and sincere. "I was just doing my job," she replied, her voice shaky. "No," he said, taking a step towards her. "You did more than that. You reminded me what's real." He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He looked down at her, his gaze searching her face. "It's done," he said. "The old business. It's gone. I cut it out. It almost killed me, but it's gone." Hana stared at him, her heart beginning to pound with a wild, impossible hope. You changed?" "I'm trying to," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to build a world where a woman like you could be with a man like me, a world that is worthy of you." Tears welled in her eyes, the grand gesture. He hadn't just offered to build a wall around his dark world. He had torn it down for her, because of her. Jinwoo, she breathed, her voice choked with tears. I never stopped loving you, he confessed, his voice breaking. Every day without you was a kind of death. If you still can't, if you still want to walk away, I'll understand. I'll let you go. I'll have the payment transferred to your account, and you will never have to see me again. But I had to tell you. I had to show you. She didn't need to think. She didn't need to weigh her principles against her heart anymore. He had realigned his world to match hers. He had chosen her. She took a step forward, closing the final inch of distance between them. She reached up, her hand trembling, and gently touched the new scar on his cheek. He flinched almost imperceptibly at the contact, then leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. I never stopped loving you either, she whispered. His eyes snapped open, and the hope that blazed in them was bright enough to light up the city. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped one arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him, while his other hand tangled in her hair, cupping the back of her head. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation and relief, of promises kept and a future reclaimed. It was 6 months of agony and loneliness poured into one moment. It was the reunion of two halves of the same soul, finally finding their way back to each other. She clung to him, her tears mingling with the kiss, her hands gripping the fine fabric of his suit as if she were afraid he might disappear. He deepened the kiss, a low groan rumbling in his chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated homecoming. In the corner of the room, Minjun smiled and quietly let himself out, closing the heavy doors behind him, leaving the king and his queen alone in their new, brighter world. 1 year later, the city looked the same, but for Seohana, everything was different. She stood on the balcony of their apartment, not a penthouse, but a beautiful modern home in a quiet residential neighborhood, watching the last rays of the sun paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The air was cool and clean, peaceful. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. What are you thinking about? Kwon Jinwoo murmured into her ear, his voice a low, contented rumble. She leaned back against his solid chest, her hand covering his. About how much can change in a year? He turned her in his arms, his eyes, once so empty, now filled with a warmth that was reserved only for her. Are you happy, Hana? The question was simple, but it held the weight of everything they had been through. The scars on his face were a permanent reminder of the war he had fought to become the man who could stand with her in the peaceful light of dusk. His company, K Global, was now a respected leader in international shipping and green technology. The shadows were gone, but the strength remained. I'm happy, she said, her voice full of a quiet, profound certainty. She had her own business now, a high-end consultancy specializing in art and document authentication, funded by her but supported by his connections. She had her principles and her love side by side, no longer at war with each other. He smiled, a true, easy smile that still made her heart skip a beat. Good, because my entire world revolves around that answer. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of lazy Sunday mornings, shared laughter, and a future that stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. It was a kiss that tasted of home. The kingpin had been redeemed, not just by her love, but by his own choice to be a better man. And the resilient heart had found not just safety, but a love that was strong enough to change the world. This story teaches us that love's true power isn't just in acceptance, but in its ability to inspire profound change. It shows that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to dismantle the parts of their life that cause harm, and that true strength is found not in dominating others, but in the courage to become a person worthy of love. It's a reminder that our principles and our hearts don't have to be in conflict. Sometimes the greatest act of love is rebuilding your world to honor both. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story of love danger and redemption moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more tales of transformative love, and share it with someone who believes in the power of a second chance. What did you think of Jinwoo's decision to tell Hana the truth? Was it a mistake, or the only way their love could have ever been real? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and for our next story, we'd love your input. Should we explore the story of Min-jun, the loyal second-in-command, and his own quest for love? Or would you rather see the tale of Sora, the pragmatic best friend, as she encounters an unexpected romance of her own? Vote now in the poll.